Well, hello, hockey fans. Welcome back to the Hockey Writers Live. If you can believe it, it is the last Thursday in the month of May already. It would normally be getting ready for the Stanley Cup final, but no, still part of a pandemic. We're still trying to wrap up the first round with a few games here. But thank you so much for joining us. I am your host, Mark Scheig, and this week we are going to have a great show for you. A little later on, we're going to have our St. Louis Blues panel on to talk about what happened to the Blues, why they're singing the Blues, why they're out of the playoffs. And right now, we're going to start off by welcoming a pretty good friend and a great guest here to us. She does great work with SBNation, covers the Philadelphia Flyers, a very prominent voice in the world of hockey, someone that I very much respect. So we are very honored to have Steph Driver join us. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. Just first and foremost, how are you doing?
Pretty well. I moved down to Atlanta a month ago.
Wow.
And it was 90 degrees today, which I'm not quite used to in May, but it's been lovely.
Nice. A little Southern hospitality then.
Yeah. I cover hockey, so why not move to the city that it's failed in twice?
Too bad the Thrashers aren't still there for you to cover, right?
I know. I'm convinced that they'll bring them back just for me. We'll see.
Okay. Now, are you still covering the Flyers as a result, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, just from afar.
Just from afar. Nice. So just talk about your year overall, especially given the pandemic. I know kind of similar to us where, with SBNation, you guys are doing a lot of great things over there. How affected were you guys in your coverage, and just how challenging was it from your perspective?
Oh God, it was brutal. Starting from the pause in March of last year, not knowing whether hockey was going to come back, and if it was, when that would happen. When we've had to cover lockouts, right? Like this is something it's just the reality of the sport.
Yep.
But there was always news coming out with the lockout. There was something to talk about, and you at least knew that, okay, well, this is definitely the off season. Like we can at least cover what the players are up to. Like there's something to cover during a lockout. During the pause, the players weren't going anywhere. They weren't posting on social media. No one knew what they were up to. No one knew what the teams were up to. No one knew what the league was up to. It was just a barren wasteland. So we had to get really creative and use some of our off-season ideas when it wasn't quite the off-season.
Yeah.
And it just got really, everyone dug really deep to match hockey players with Pokemon and Disney songs. Like we had to do a lot of really wacky things, but we got through it. And then the playoffs were weird. And then the off season, which was like a month long, was also very weird. It was just a wild time.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, I was just going to say, it's got to be a testament to your staff, the flexibility for them to be able to meet the challenge of this. It really goes to show just how respected you guys are in the hockey world, right?
Yeah, I think so. So I manage about 400 writers across SBNation. And they're incredible from top to bottom. So we have some really big sites, and they're the ones that you would assume. So Toronto, Montreal, New York, the Rangers specifically, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, Detroit too. Those are our big sites, our biggest sites. And then our tiny sites, Florida, Arizona, and women's hockey are our tiny sites, but they're all doing such amazing content. And, just because they're a smaller site doesn't necessarily mean that they're phoning it in. Like the Ice Garden, the women's hockey site, has access to women's hockey players like nothing I've ever seen before. They're just hanging out, playing games on Twitch with former Olympians. Like no big deal. This is just what they do.
Yeah.
And the way that, I don't think I've got to really think back. I don't think anybody left during the pandemic or even after, which is astounding for me to even think of. I hadn't thought about that before now. Like nobody threw in the towel. Like, this is too hard. We can't do it. And I totally would have understood. Like there were times that I wanted to.
And Steph, that really goes to show the condition in the hockey world today. I know our site is similar to yours in the sense that we're covering hockey, but you look at the general scheme of journalism, and a lot of jobs are kind of being eliminated and stuff like that. There's a real need for good hockey coverage. And, especially your site brings that. Just how important is it to have these kind of voices, these kind of opportunities now, especially when it's so challenging today?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. The way that I approach blogging is, I think, very different than how a beat writer would approach covering the team, where I think that the more opinion we provide, the better.
Yep.
So my general philosophy is that we tell people how to feel. So whether it's an analysis article on goaltending, or a deep dive into a new statistic, or just a game recap, like, we're telling people what happened and what we think about it. And they can either agree or disagree, and that forms their own opinions. And that's what makes you a fan, not being told what to think, but forming your own opinions yourself based on the information you have in front of you.
Absolutely. And that's why we're here. The fans are hungry for content. And
yes,
what if we can provide that in such a way that it's easy. I know that there's some subscription based sites out there where you pay a couple bucks, you get some good content, but then our sites, and people can go out the internet and they can pull our stuff up, and there's always something to do. Like, if you really want to look for the content, it's always there. And that's a testament to what sites like ours are doing. I think it's huge if it continues like this.
Yeah, I agree. And our two networks, I think, are the best free ones that are available. I can't even think of another one that I would put on our level. And it's so important with so many sites going behind paywalls. Like, you're just not going to grow the game that way. And that's not necessarily our responsibility, but it never hurts to have more hockey fans. It never hurts to have more hockey fans, especially when during the pause and then after the pause, hockey was the only sport that was on at the time. Like, let's bring in more people. Let's give them more information.
Yeah, that's it. Just as you said, grow the game, be inclusive. And I can't remember who said this, but someone had the absolute money quote about inclusiveness and how some of us perceived experts, the way that we communicate with them, like, we want to be welcoming, like, we don't want to talk over people. I think with Twitter, the way everything else goes, little bit of a toxic culture that's out there in terms of trying to grow the game. I mean, hopefully we're going in the right direction here, but I think it's hugely important that we establish ourselves as being inclusive, welcoming people, answering questions. I mean, that's why we're here at the end of the day, is to bring in, cater to the fans that we have, but grow the game.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they do their hockey is for everyone situation every year. And that's, not always successful, but I say, the NHL and hockey may not be for everyone, but SBNation is.
Absolutely. Hey, amen to that. Steph Driver from SBNation joining us here on the Hockey Writers Live. And let's talk about the team that you know very well. And I very much enjoy your tweets, the Philadelphia Flyers. Good Lord. I think about last year.
That's about it. We have had a whole time. I am a fan of the Flyers in that I hate them very much, but I also want them to win more than anything else in the world.
Yeah. So they went from really good last year. I don't know how much you put of that on the pandemic or COVID. It stopped the momentum, and kind of really bad this year. Do you have a sense of why it flipped so suddenly?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors. But and we can talk about every single one of them, but what it really boils down to is that every single worst case scenario happened at once, every single one. So going into the COVID pause, the Flyers were one of, if not the best team in hockey. They were rolling for 2+ months and just destroying everyone in their path. And it was the best that I've ever seen them look. And then we went on a pause. They came back, and the round robin tournament to seed them, and they got the number 1 seed. They looked great. And then the actual playoffs happened and the wheels just completely fell off. So what happened this year Number one was our defense had some huge holes. So Matt Niskanen retired at the end of the playoffs last year. He decided, and I don't hold a grudge against this at all. Playing through a pandemic, not for him, not for his family. He's done. I respect it.
Yep.
And then we had our goaltending situation. So our prince who was promised, Carter Hart, also completely fell apart. And we have backup Brian Elliott, who is a good backup if you play him 20 games a season, maybe 30 if we're including a couple playoff games in there. Like, that's really stretching it. And he had to come in relief of Carter Hart way too often. Carter Hart had, I think it was an 887 save percentage. Like, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And that was something that we knew covering the team. And then he also addressed this in his exit interviews. But for Carter, it was the pandemic. He's a young guy, 23, living alone in a city he doesn't really know, in the middle of a pandemic, going back and forth to the rink every day, not seeing anyone. The mental toll that it took on him was huge. And goalie is a position where you really need your goaltender to be locked in mentally. And he wasn't. Right. He had a really, really hard time during the pandemic. Again, something I can relate to. And I don't hold it against him. It was a bad year for a lot of people. I believe that he's going to bounce back. I don't think that this will be a lingering problem. But the fact that we had such horrific goaltending, neither one of our goaltenders was above a 9.0 save percentage. Neither one of them. It was bad, paired with the defense apparently only being held together by Matt Niskanen, who is no longer there. It was brutal. The forward core, they did fine. There's a lot of emphasis on the younger guys and how they just didn't take a step forward, with the exception of Joel Farabee, who absolutely did take the step forward. But I don't even necessarily think that that's the complete truth. I just think that, I hate to say it was the pandemic, but this team was really in shambles in every single aspect. So at home, in the locker room, and on the ice, they were really having a really hard time. There's some changes that need to be made in the offseason. A lot of people are calling for Alain Vigneault to be fired. And I don't think that that's the right move right now. People are calling for Michelle Therrien and I just forgot. I completely blanked on the name of the other assistant coach. Oh, he was the head coach of the Blues before Berube. Why can't I think of his name?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's on tip of my tongue too. I know who you're thinking of.
Oh, Mike Yeo. Thank you.
Yeo. There you go. Yo.
Yeah. So he's also behind the bench. People are calling more for Therrien than Yeo to be fired. But I don't necessarily disagree. I think that one or both of them should go, because the power play and the penalty kill were so bad this season. We need to add a top 4 defensemen, if not a top 2. We discovered that Ivan Provorov is not the 1D that we thought he was. He's very likely a 1D that can, or 2D that can just eat minutes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we need a really solid 3C. This season was incredibly disappointing in that aspect. And there's a lot of feelings behind that. So Nolan Patrick slotted as the 3C, coming back from nearly 2 full years away from the ice, dealing with a migraine disorder. The fact that he was playing at all, I think, was a big success for him. But 9 points in a full season is not going to cut it. That's not second overall pick production.
And you've hit, so one at a time here, you've hit a couple of things that I was going to ask you about. So you mentioned Carter Hart. Sounds to me like you're really not too terribly concerned. Like a good bounce back in a normal year seems reasonable.
Yeah.
So there's confidence there. So how about, now is Brian Elliott coming back then?
I think that would be a mistake. Really at this point, I just don't think they can afford to run that tandem again, just in case, in case things go south with Carter Hart. And I don't think they will, but they really can't afford the question mark. They can't afford for that to maybe be the case. So I don't know who is out there. And the Flyers system, like maybe Alex Lyon. Do you trust him more than Brian Elliott? Not quite, but he's young and he's been there for a while and he'll be cheap. So maybe there's a few guys coming up that just aren't NHL caliber right now. That doesn't mean that they won't be, but it's just not a very
kind of deep.
Like stellar pipeline. Like it's there. There's a lot of guys there, but it's not quite at the level that we would want it to be.
Understood. You mentioned Alain Vigneault. You mentioned the maybe one or both of the assistants, and fans are calling for them.
Yes.
Are we starting to run the gambit, or how much string does Vigneault have left?
I don't think it's a lot. And that's really a shame. So last season, he was a finalist for the Jack Adams Award. And this season, he could not do anything right. And I don't know how much patience the fans of Philadelphia will have going into next season. Ownership probably has a little bit more patience, but we're getting towards the end of Claude Giroux's career. Sean Couturier is aging as we speak. Jake Voracek, we don't know if he's going to be around next season. But those two, Claude Giroux, Sean Couturier, like you need to, if you want to win a cup, they've got to be on your team as the Flyers. So like there's not a whole lot of time to give Vigneault to work out the kinks. Like you need to come in ready to go day one next season in training camp. Like there's no more room to mess around. That was this season.
Yeah. So Nolan Patrick was someone else that you mentioned. You already quoted not enough production for a center like that. Number 2 overall pick. Does he still have a future in Philadelphia, Steph?
I really want to think so. So I am a rabid Nolan Patrick defender because the best moment of my Flyers fandom and my career covering the Flyers was when they jumped from 13 to 2 in the draft lottery. Like that was the moment. It didn't matter who they picked at number 2. I was going to ride or die with that guy. Like that was it. And it was Nolan Patrick. So in his first 2 seasons, his age 19 and 20 seasons, he had 30 points. He was streaky, but you could see he was still putting it together. He would have benefited from some AHL time, but that's not legal. So he couldn't do it. But he was putting it together. It was not what you would expect to see out of like Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews, but that just wasn't the draft. Like that, this just wasn't that year. So it was fine. It was fine. And if he can get back to that production and 3C is what he's at, that's a success for me. And then he missed the season with the migraine disorder. And, Mark, you know me well. I had a stroke 3 years ago. So I know about like brain stuff and brains are so weird. And when we're talking migraine disorder, like we're not talking, he gets a headache every now and then. Like, there are some migraine disorders that will paralyze you. There are some migraine disorders that will blind you.
Yep.
There are some migraine disorders that act as a stroke. Like, there's a lot that's just not, oh, he's got a headache. And we don't know what he was dealing with. He doesn't want to talk about it. And I don't blame him.
Can't blame him, right?
So coming back after the full season, plus the 2 off seasons and the pause that he missed, and it ended up being nearly 600 days. Like, it was nearly 2 full years that he hadn't played hockey. His skating looked good. Mm-hmm. His passing needed improvement. His finishing, he could not finish to save his own life. But the skills are there. The hockey IQ is there. There's a lot of rumors going around that the Flyers are going to try and move him and he just needs a change of scenery. And I don't think that's the case. Watching his exit interview, and he's always gruff with the media. That's just who he is as a person. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But during his exit interview, like, it was really clear there was no one that he hated more than himself right there, right then and there. It was the closest you're going to get to a hockey player saying, I played like crap this season, and not having an excuse for it, just being really disappointed in himself. I think that he deserves another season here. And if he can't put it together, then fine, change of scenery. Like, that makes sense. But I think he deserves another season to try and put it together here. And if that's not the case, then I wish him well wherever he goes. But I think, and for another thing, the Flyers are going to be real tight up against the cap. He's making under $1 million. Like, he's a cheap guy. Why are you trying to move that?
Great points all the way around. One last question for Steph here. You mentioned that some changes definitely need to happen. So if we're going to give you the chance to be the GM of the Philadelphia Flyers for a minute, what would you do to try to make a couple subtle changes, maybe shake up the roster? Like, what are you prioritizing if you had the opportunity?
Number one defenseman. You really, really need to get that number one defenseman, whether it's Dougie Hamilton, whether it's, that's the pipe dream for everyone, right? Everyone's watching free agency and everyone wants Dougie Hamilton.
Yep.
Or if it's a trade with Nashville, like,
T.S. Ekholm
or,
Ellis.
That's the one. Thank you. This is what, for the listeners who don't know me, I mentioned the stroke. This is one of my side effects. I cannot remember names to say.
I'm pretty bad with them too, but yes.
Yeah, you got it. Like, that's a thing. Like, I know what I'm saying. I just can't, it's the names. So those 2 defensemen, Ellis and Ekholm, that would be really cool. Really cool. Some other defensemen whose names have been thrown around. Seth Jones, his name has been thrown around.
Oh, goody.
It's not credible, and it's not.
No, it's still worth monitoring, because if he decides not to sign, then that's going to be the prevailing story in Columbus, and that's all it's going to be talked about. So
Yep. So, there are a lot of names out there, but we really, really need a partner for Ivan Provorov. Like, we saw last year what he could do with a really strong defenseman in Matt Niskanen. Side note, who knew that Matt Niskanen had so much gas left in the tank? Like, when they signed him going into the season, I was like, all right, well, that's fine. And he held the defense together. I had no idea that that's what they needed. But they need someone to play with Ivan Provorov, and then everyone else just falls into place. So there's a lot of rumors going around that Shane Gostisbehere won't be back. And I think that that's something that's been said for the past 3 off seasons, and he's stuck. And I love him in Philly. I would like him to stay in Philly. I don't want him to keep having to hear his name as being the guy that has to go in the off season. I think that that's really hard. And it's hard for him. I think it's hard for him to play through as well. He's another guy who it really weighs on him. He's a very emotional player. So whether he's here or not, we've got Phil Myers, who had an abysmal season. Like, we know that he's better than that. Travis Sanheim, Robert Haig is not good, but he's still floating around. Samuel Moran made his return to the NHL starting as a forward. This season was so weird, man. This season was so weird. Samuel Moran started the season as a forward after being drafted as a defenseman, playing in juniors and AHL as a defenseman for years. Came back from 2 torn ACLs and ACL surgeries, hadn't played hockey in 2 years, started as a forward, realized, no, this is not quite good, and went back to defenseman and played a couple dozen games as a defenseman for the Flyers. Like, just a wild season. I would love to see him come back because he's just another feel-good story. And the forward core, you know, they're pretty well set from the top 6. Sean Couturier, Joel Farabee, Claude Giroux, Jake Voracek, Travis Konechny, Kevin Hayes. There's a winger that I'm missing in my head that I just can't. JVR. Like, some of these guys are going to be gone, probably either Jake Voracek or JVR in the expansion draft.
Yep.
But they're pretty well set. And then they'll bring up Morgan Frost next season. The bottom 6 is the only thing that might be questionable, but that's only because there's so many guys that they could slot in there. It's fine. The forwards are not the problem. It's the defense, and then Carter Hart coming back to form.
A lot of interesting questions that are out there. Always something going on with the Flyers. Fans, make sure that you follow Steph on Twitter at StephAliciousD. Does a great job managing SBNation. Mentioned over 400 writers. Go check their stuff out, Steph. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us here on the Hockey Writers Live to talk about the site and the Flyers.
Thanks so much, Mark. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So fans, stay tuned for part 2. We're going to flip over from the Flyers to the St. Louis Blues, and we're going to see what happened there. So stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, fans, welcome back to part 2 of the Hockey Writers Live. I am your host, Mark Scheig. It's May the 27th, 2021, and you have made it to part 2. Had a wonderful time with Steph Driver talking all things SBNation, the Philadelphia Flyers. Just a wonderful, wonderful, hardworking person, very respected. So again, in case you missed that, check out the first part of our interview. And if you ever miss any of our interviews, you're in luck. You won't miss a thing. If you hit that subscribe button, make sure you hit like on Facebook. We're out on Apple Play. We're out on Spotify. Just this past week, we're now out on iHeartRadio. Not only this podcast, but all of the Hockey Writers network of podcasts. You think of it, it is out there. Everything from the Sabres to the Maple Leafs. And I can go on and on here. The Flames are out there. And I know I'm missing a few. We have one that's an all-female panel now as well called Sticks and Chicks. Or it's Chicks and Sticks anyway. But still, we have a lot of great, great podcasts. And if you just hit that subscribe button on any of those, you definitely will not miss a thing. Usually we drop one new episode on all these different podcasts a day, it seems like. So if you need your hockey fix, right here at the Hockey Writers, where you go. So let's jump into part 2. We got our panel here. We've got our 3 St. Louis Blues writers. And unfortunately, St. Louis is singing the Blues because they were ousted by the Colorado Avalanche. So we need to get some answers. So let's introduce the panel to you. First off, Ethan Carter is joining us. Hello, Ethan.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate being on here again.
I appreciate having you on here. And Stephen Ground is joining us. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
And Rob Staggenborg is joining us as well. Hello, Rob.
Hey, guys. Nice to see you guys.
Nice to see all of you. Ethan, we're going to start with you here. I mean, geez, I know Ryan O'Reilly had a little bit of confidence going into it, thinking that they're going to maybe enjoy some success. Well, they couldn't win a game. They got swept right out. So what in your mind went wrong here? I know it could probably take a while, but just what sticks out to you as what went wrong for the St. Louis Blues?
Well, I went into it when I was on a couple weeks ago. I thought Colorado was a better matchup for the Blues, and I stand by that. I think Vegas was a harder matchup, but I just think the Blues found themselves in a spot where they were playing a team that not only needs to win this year, because if you look at their cap structure, I mean, they have underpaid superstars on that team, but they're just a better team. I mean, Colorado's better. It was going to take Colorado not being their best and the Blues playing better than many would have expected for them to win. So I think the Avs combination of speed and skill, and I'm not trying to say they got lucky when it came to some things that happened, but they did get a lot of bounces, if we're being honest. Now, that wouldn't have changed the series. The Blues were going to lose no matter what. But when you have that combination of speed and skill, and they were physical, and they didn't take very many bad penalties, and they got some bounces there, especially game 3. The Blues were playing very well, but then they get that bounce off of Binnington. Stick goes in the net. So the Avs were just better. I mean, I think the Blues didn't play as well as they could have. Perron being out was absolutely brutal, and the Avs were just better.
Well, Stephen, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Ethan said, and I also agree that I did think Colorado had the chance to be the better matchup because there was the possibility of a style mismatch where if the Blues really played their game and got physical, that the highly skilled but smaller Avs might not be able to keep up. That didn't happen, obviously. As Ethan alluded to, it didn't help that our top scorer, David Perron, landed on the COVID list right at the start of the series after the Blues had been really fortunate with that all season. They were the last American team to have a player miss a game because of that. But I think at the end of the day, when you face a team as good as the Avs are and you lose to them, there's not a lot of shame in that. You'd like to see them win a game or two, give it a little bit of fight. But, I don't think there's any debating that the Avs were the better team this season. And sometimes that's just how it goes.
All right, Rob, you get the final word on just what went wrong in the series.
Sure. Again, I think the Blues had a tremendous identity crisis all year. And again, losing Alex Pietrangelo, was the thing a lot of people talked about. I think where it really showed up was the fact that they needed that influence in the back line. They're playing with a lot of young guys. Again, they walked in the season. Carl Gunnarsson, the Stanley Cup champion, out for the season. So that really twisted things. And then again, Colton Franco playing nicked up all year. Got great seasons out of Justin Falk and Torrey Krug, again, for what they brought him in for. He was good. But again, I just think the identity was that they wanted to be a scoring team, and it became the physicality is what ended up killing them in the end. They just couldn't hang with the physicality of the Avalanche, and through what I saw.
All right, Stephen, we're going to start with you on this next question. And, this seems like that anytime that a team loses, you always point at goaltending. And especially in St. Louis, you point at Jordan Binnington because he did get that new contract. So my question for you guys is, what is your concern level at Jordan Binnington? And do you feel like that contract could come back and bite the team?
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty strongly that the contract is, I don't know if necessary evil is the right word, but I don't think it was a mistake at this juncture, because I think you look at the market right now, there aren't a lot of goalies available this summer. You look at a team like Edmonton that, also is pointing a lot of fingers at their goalie. There are teams out there that you could see bidding a lot for a guy who's already won a Stanley Cup. Look at the contract Matt Murray got last year. I think you can see reasons to believe that there would have been a hot market for Binnington had he reached that level. The Blues are also a team that just have never in their 50-year history had a long-term goaltending solution. About the best option is Mike Liut back in the 80s. He was here for much of the decade and played really well. But I think, is it a high number and a long-term for a goalie? Sure, but it's not at the very top end of the spectrum in the, Carey Price, Vasilevsky stratosphere. I think he actually looked pretty good for most of the postseason. They were, again, just playing a really good team. I believe it was game 2 or 3 where literally every goal that went in, he was completely screened and didn't have a prayer. So I don't put a lot of the blame at Binnington's feet for the series. And he played really well at the final stretch of the season that helped them get into the postseason to begin with. So I'm not too worried personally.
Okay, Rob, how worried are you?
Well, I agree with everything you said 100%. I think the contract's going to burn us at the end of it in year 5 or 6. Because again, the only worst job in the NHL is that rather than being a goalie is to be an NHL coach, because you just don't have that sort of longevity. The thing that concerns me is he's a head case. Inside St. Louis, people love him. They think that's great. They think that's that's part of his personality. But boy, outside of St. Louis, everybody thinks he's a head case. He's a jerk. He's kind of a show off. And I'm just wondering if, when you put that stuff out there and you can't back it up, it starts becoming a wave and a tidal wave and becomes a confidence killer. And so I'm just concerned about years 2 and 3. Is this guy popping off a little bit too much? Has he earned the right to pop off? Yeah, he got a Stanley Cup. I get it. But, again, I think a lot of old time people like those goalies just to be quiet and do their job. They don't want them, challenging the other goalie. They think it's a little bit of a circus act.
And Ethan, you get the final word on Jordan Binnington.
I mean, I would say that I agree with a lot of what they said, what both of them said. I don't know about the contract. Was it a little too much in terms of annual average salary? Maybe. I think that he was very good in game 1 and in game 2. But if you look at when you have the terrible coverage in the back end that the Blues had for most of the series, and you're playing it's the best line in the league, in my opinion, it's just not good. And there were some really bad goals given up by the defenders themselves, not even Binnington. Like, I think it was game 2 where they had a deflection and then a perfect screen, then another perfect screen. So he played well, I think, in the playoffs for the most part. But at the end of the day, I just want competent goaltending. And I think the Blues can have that. And you got to remember in 2019 when they won the Cup, the defense was very good for most of that run. Game 7, I know the Bruins threw everything at them, and Binnington basically won them the game from the jump. But I think the contract was smart to lock him up, like Steven said. And I think the market for goaltending is always tough. And then drafting one, you never know. It takes time too. So when you have a goaltender that you trust, I think you just got to keep him. And I think that's what the Blues did.
All righty, Rob, we'll start with you on question number 3 here. And you kind of alluded to it already when you first when we talked about the first question, but Alex Pietrangelo, at least to me, I know when he went to Vegas, I was curious to see if Torrey Krug was going to be enough. I personally didn't think so, but then to be able to miss a presence like that, at least from an outsider's point of view, really seemed to slow the Blues down a little bit. So just my question for you guys, how much of an influence, because you have the beauty of 2020 now of hindsight, how much did they miss Alex Pietrangelo?
For me, I'll go back to a football analogy. It's, you got a quarterback. Alex Pietrangelo is one type of quarterback. Torrey Krug is another type of quarterback. Torrey Krug is very offensive minded. He's got that push. I think what he does, he's excellent at it. But I think what they were missing is they needed that veteran influence who was just that shutdown. And like our guest earlier said, every team in the league is looking for a big shutdown defenseman. It's not a secret. We're not the only team, and they're just not really out there outside of Dougie Hamilton, who obviously will have everyone, suiting him. So again, for me, I think, Pietrangelo brought that, but we can't cry over spilled milk. He left. He had the offer. He decided to leave. But I think that trying to replace him with more of an offensive-minded defenseman, that kind of changed the complexion of the team. I know on the radio the other day they were talking maybe Doug Armstrong maybe overcorrected. They were really bad on the power play. They were very bad on offense. Maybe he went out and maybe leaned a little bit too much on the offensive side, and then that could have been something that tripped him up later in the season. So I don't know. That's kind of where I'm coming from on that.
All right, Ethan, your thoughts on Pietrangelo's absence?
Well, I think Doug Armstrong would probably say this behind closed doors. I don't think he regrets not giving Pietrangelo that contract, but he regrets losing the player. I think that contract is a really hard one to give. You're given a ton of power, like Armstrong himself said in October. You're giving a lot of power to one player, and you got a no movement clause, and he's going to be in Vegas with that contract until he's in his upper 30s. That's a really hard contract to give out. So I think I would agree if Doug Armstrong would say this, and I think he would, was that he regrets losing the player, but he doesn't regret not giving that contract. So they definitely missed him. There's no doubt, but I think a lot of people forget he had some rough years there for a couple of years before really getting his game going in 2019. Now he's looked at as one of the best two-way defensemen in the league, and I think that's great for him, but they missed him for sure. I think that they needed that consistent presence. Like Rob said, they thought Parayko would be that guy this year, step into that role. played injured, had his back injury the entire season, didn't look the same. I thought he was playing pretty well going into the postseason, and then he just didn't play well in that series. So they definitely missed him, but I don't think that giving that contract out may have been that smart. Vegas is a team going for it. The Blues already won one, and I know that's maybe a stupid way to look at it, but that contract, I wouldn't have given it out either if I were Doug Armstrong.
All right, Steven, you get the final word on this one.
Yeah, I don't want to be accused of giving a wishy-washy answer, but I think we really need a year or two more to fairly judge the Pietrangelo situation. They certainly missed him. I agree with everything that was said there, and I think, if we don't see a course correction here, then I believe it was a huge mistake not to sign him. We saw Armstrong offer a couple long, expensive deals. We talked about Binnington, Braden Shen, got an 8-year deal. We'll see with Jaden Schwartz, as he hits unrestricted free agency this summer. He gave a couple of deals specifically to reward guys who were part of that cup run, and then to let your captain, the heart and soul of your team, the guy that could potentially have had the statue outside the stadium, to let him walk. If you're going to go that route, seems like a huge mistake. However, if he does have a course correction here and they get younger and faster and more skilled, and they really change to that more puck possession transition game, the kind that Torrey Krug can play, the kind that Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas will hopefully play, then I think everything Ethan said is right on about the contract and how much you'd be regretting it in 4 or 5 years. So don't want to, be kind of flip-floppy, but it's kind of too soon to tell for me to be really fair.
All right. In case you're just joining us, this is the Hockey Writers Live. We're talking to our St. Louis Blues panel of writers. We have Ethan Carter, Stephen Ground, and Rob Staggerborg joining us here. Got 3 more questions for the panel. Ethan, we'll start with you on this one. Just overall thoughts on the season. Specifically, I'm curious, what kind of grades you give out, or just how you felt both GM Doug Armstrong did and that Coach Craig Berube did for the team.
Well, we knew Armstrong was going to be taking some risks, like we just said, letting Pietrangelo go, that's a big risk. Bringing in a smaller defenseman like Krug, and then the trade for Falk last year before the season. Some weird moves he's made since they won the cup. I will say that. And then the big thing for me that really annoys me, I think it annoys a lot of Blues fans and people who cover the team probably, bringing in Mike Hoffman and then completely misusing him for the first 2.5 months of the season. I mean, that's egregious. You cannot do that. And I think Craig Berube, I don't understand why they didn't make more adjustments overall throughout the season, and why he wasn't I know a lot of people just crush Zach Sanford all the time with this team, but the fact that he was playing in the postseason over the likes of Clem Costin or pretty much anybody else, Dakota Joshua played better. It just doesn't make much sense to me. The fact that he didn't make more adjustments in that series as well and throughout the season definitely hurt the team. But I think Berube needs to maybe take a step back this offseason and kind of rethink the style, like we've been saying forever at this point, the last 2 seasons at least, especially this one. But I think the biggest misplay by the Blues this season was the Mike Hoffman thing. And I think that's going to cost a chance of maybe bringing him back. And I don't see that happening anyway, but they got a lot of things to think about. But I think the biggest thing for me is the style needs to be rethought, and the Hoffman thing really bothered me throughout the season.
Okay, Steven, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for a letter grade, I'd go D, maybe D-. And the only reason I wouldn't say F is because, well, A, they did make the playoffs, and B, they did have some catastrophic injuries they had to sort of navigate. But it just, everything didn't seem right all season. They ended up being a distant 4th in a division that wasn't that strong. It was very top heavy, but they were clearly the best of the have-nots in a division that was full of haves and have-nots. And that's how they made the playoffs. I thought Army gave an interesting quote in his, Doug Armstrong, general manager, gave an interesting quote in his post-season press conference today. He said there were 3 good people on the hockey side that had a good year. Those were Justin Falk, David Perron, and Ryan O'Reilly. And then he said, quote, "The rest of us, starting with myself and the coaches and the rest of the players, we have to find a different level." And then Craig Berube sort of added to that by saying we didn't put the team first a lot of times. So when you look at comments that are that public and that openly negative, that openly critical, Armstrong hasn't been afraid to mince words in the past. I think it's I think you have to look at it as a kind of disappointing season, and I think they're going to a tougher division next year in some ways, and they really have to kind of improve and find their footing to keep up.
All right, Rob, last word on the coach and the general manager.
I'm giving them a firm D, and the only reason why I'm giving them a D and not an F is because of Jordan Binnington coming out of the shell and giving them to the playoffs. I mean, look, this is a team that basically backed into the playoffs. I mean, because Arizona was terrible, we end up getting in by hook or crook, okay? And then the whole mantra at the trade deadline was, hey, as long as we get in, that's all we want. Well, we got in and we got swept. So, I mean, in the results-oriented business, it's like, okay, all these moral victories and all this great stuff. The bottom line is you got swept, and really you're no better than, anybody else. I mean, you're just one of the other 31 teams at the end of the year. And really, how will history remember this season? Will they remember it? I mean, I maybe would think of a couple Jordan Binnington saves, and maybe David Perron, his point per game season this year, but nothing stretched out. I mean, again, the other thing that really stood out to me at the trade deadline is I think St. Louis people, we way overvalue our own talent, because at the trade deadline, Doug Armstrong said that his phone just wasn't ringing off the hook. So, maybe we're thinking our guys are way better than they really are. But the fact is he wasn't really getting a whole lot of offers for Hoffman. He wasn't getting a whole lot of workable offers. So what does that mean? Does that mean we're sitting on some dead weight? I mean, I think those are some questions that we have to ask. Braden Shen, I love that guy. But wow, man, he's disappeared. Jaden Schwartz is another guy. He's up for a contract, and beginning of the year, I'd say, oh man, you definitely got to sign him. Now I'm really maybe not so sure. Then certainly we talk about defense. So I think there's a lot of questions going in, but they're not questions that any other team's not having. There's the same questions every franchise is having that isn't hoisting the Stanley Cup.
All right, so Stephen, let's start with you here on this next one. Curious to know, as someone who been on the Blues for a while, very important part of the team, but is an unrestricted free agent, that's Jaden Schwartz. So does he re-sign with the Blues? How do you feel like that situation is going to play out? Is there still a future for him with the Blues?
It's definitely an option. I don't think this is a situation where the door is closed by any means. I think it really depends on the number and the length of contract he wants. This is a player that for a long time was looked at as the straw that stirs the drink, to borrow a phrase that was used about him a lot in St. Louis. And he really seemed like the engine behind the offense. There were a couple of years where he had long injured stretches and the team was terrible. And then the moment he got back in the lineup, they were unbeatable again. If he can return to that form, he's a valuable piece here. But as Rob alluded to, not a good season, has had injury struggles throughout his career. So I think it'd be insane to commit to a long contract of 6, 7, 8 years for him. More than that, the offense just was not good enough. This is a team that trailed the league by 20 in high danger chances. They were the last in the entire league, way behind even the Red Wings. So as part of that offense, I don't think anyone's job should be guaranteed going into next year. And if removing him clears up a spot that they can use to transform the offense a little bit, I love him and he's given a lot to this team, but I just wish him best of luck wherever he ends up in that case.
All right. So Rob, what do you think?
Well, I really think that if they were going to strike a deal with Jaden Schwartz, they would have done it. I mean, they did it with Binnington, and I think that they would have had some sort of arrangement in place, or at least worked towards it. But boy, that trail has gone cold, and we're not even hearing any rumors or any talk about that. So I just have to think that because of his production, because this is a great time to move him out, I don't think he's a $4 or $5 million player. I mean, I'm not sure what he would command on the open market given his season. Again, I'm concerned that if we bring him back, that's one message. If we let him go, that's a whole nother message. So it's the message being that, we just don't trust our own development system versus, hey, we're going to win and die with him. So it's a real roll of the dice. I would love to see him be like a comeback player of the year next year. I'd love to see him do it, but I just think that's a lot of money to roll into that one contract when offense maybe isn't going to be your top priority next year.
All right, Ethan, you get the final word on Jaden Schwartz.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. I think I've kind of felt over the last couple months that it wasn't going to happen. I think he's going to go because I think there's teams out there that would like to bring him in and would probably offer more than the Blues at this point, because you think about it, 2 of the last 3 seasons that we've seen from him, 2019 and this season, were not good. He made up for 2019 by being very good in the postseason and scoring big-time goals, 2 hat tricks in the Cup run, but he just hasn't been the same player. And I know he's gone through a lot of things personally throughout his career, especially this year with his father passing. So he's just had a tough go. He's obviously, one of the best Blues of the decade, I would say, in terms of what he's done for the franchise. But I kind of always felt in the last few months that he's not going to be back, and I would be surprised if he was. I think they're going to go more towards letting other guys try to step into that top 6 role, or bringing in a star or a big-time top 6 forward, which could happen. We'll see probably Robert Thomas or Jordan Kyrou, unless one of them is traded, who knows, into that top 6. So I don't think Schwartz will be back. I'd be a little bit surprised if he was, because this is his time to get paid. He's 28 years old, hitting the open market. This is the time for him to get paid. So I don't think he'll be back.
All right, we have reached the final question of the night here. Save the best for last. So, Rob, we're going to start with you. We're going to give you the opportunity in like 60 seconds for each of you, something quick. So imagine that you are in Armstrong's position and you're trying to make moves for the Blues this offseason. What are you prioritizing to help this roster?
I'm getting Torrey Krug a partner, just a big shutdown defenseman. I'm going to go ahead and spend some money because, again, like I said, I think I could peel off some salary. Expansion draft. There's been some talk that maybe I might let Tarasenko open for that. Again, not sure they would want to take on that kind of contract. But I do think that you got to rework the money to bring in that defenseman, because this division, again, the division they're going in next year, I think it's going to be a heavy game. And I don't know that the speed game is going to work when they're going up against, their new opponents next year. I think it's going to be a battle of the survival of the fittest. So I would hope that he would go in and get a big defenseman.
All right, Ethan, about 60 seconds. What would you do?
Well, I would definitely try to make a splash. I think the first call I'd make is to Kevin Adams and seeing, what's up with Jack Eichel. That's what I'm doing, because you don't get superstar talents in the market like that very often. And if you can get a good sense that he's healthy, I would give up a lot for him. And I think, like Rob said earlier, Blues fans tend to overvalue the talent. Robert Thomas hasn't been much of a producer overall throughout his career, so maybe that's a guy you throw in there. But I think Tarasenko, you got to look at possibly moving on from him, or at least talking to teams about it, Seattle being one of those teams. And then bring in, if you want to make a splash in the open market, look at Landeskog. I think he'll stay in Colorado, but kick the tires. And then maybe Dougie Hamilton or Jamie Alexiak, a big defenseman on the back end, would be important.
Okay. And Steven, you get the final word on what you would do about 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think Rob nailed this earlier with the 2-word phrase, identity crisis. I don't know that there's one move out there that's just the perfect fit for the Blues. I think really it's a bigger question of you need to decide what your identity is going to be and go hard in that direction. If you want to be young and be skilled and play the transition game, add some pieces that suit that and shed some pieces that don't. If you want to be smash mouth and physical, go that way and, move in that direction. Change your coaching staff to fit that, or add whatever you need. But it just can't be another season of we're going to add a piece that's convenient and available. We're going to add Torrey Krug because we're panicking that Pietrangelo is leaving. They have to figure out what they want to be, and it doesn't really matter what it is as much as that they decide what it is and go in that direction confidently.
Well, this has been excellent stuff by all three of you, as always. Ethan, Steven, Rob, great job covering the Blues. Fans, make sure that you follow them. They are all out on Twitter. Do a great job here for the Hockey Writers. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us to recap crazy season in St. Louis.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. So fans, just again, you can find us anywhere. You can watch us on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're out on Instagram. If audio is more your thing, we have the audio version. We're out on Apple Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You will never miss any of our panels. You'll never miss any of our interviews. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us here. Have a great night. Have a great week. Stay safe. Enjoy all the hockey. We will see you next time here on the Hockey Writers Live. Take care.